All right, I'm Laura Bieber, and I'm here with Shelley Guess. We are here with our Voices from the Field portion of the Supervisor Support Network, just to hear from other people in the field and what they're experiencing with supervision, their journey with supervision, and how they feel like the field of supervision is growing and expanding, and how we can better support each other. So, Shelley, why don't you tell us all a little bit about yourself, and your practice, and kind of what you have going on?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be able to share whatever little tidbits I can bring to the conversation. So thank you. So again, my name is Shelley. I am the owner and founder of Hope Connects Counseling. We're a group mental health private practice located in Las Colinas, Texas. Right now, we have about 10 therapists, including myself on the team. And two of those are practicum students. And so we're very fortunate to have a range of experience and different licenses. We have several LPCSs, we've got fully licensed associates, and then we also do have our two practicum students on our team. So it really creates this great depth of knowledge where when we do case staffing, when we have things where we come together as a team, there's all of these different voices and experience that's just able to have these really great conversations. And so it's an honor to be a person who's helping to just facilitate things, because when you work with such great professionals, there's not a whole lot of leading that you need to do per se, or managing maybe is a better way to say it. I don't have to
Yeah.
manage them that way. I get to just be a part of this really flourishing group of people that is doing a lot in the field themselves. So I'm also a PhD candidate. I am about done with my PhD in psychology and counseling. Goodness, God willing, I'll be done with this thing. I walk the stage, where I'm on the timeline to walk the stage on May 2025, but with my dissertation defense coming up in November, I could be Dr. Guest as soon as Thanksgiving. So
Wow, that's awesome.
yeah, it's been a long journey. That's a different podcast.
That is a degree of endurance for sure.
Yes, very much so.
Yeah. So how long have you been in a role as a supervisor, whether it's been with students or pre-licensed professionals?
Um, for about 4 years now, something like that. And so I have taught master's level courses. So there was a level of training that happened, as an educator in the academic setting. But in terms of actually supervising, more in a supervisory role like that, that's been about 4 years at this point.
Okay. And how have you seen just like the field of like within supervision, or what you're seeing with students or pre-licensed professionals? How have you seen that change, especially since COVID?
Oh gosh, man, the COVID is the first thing that popped into my head. The number one thing is just the booming expansion of online therapy. That has been the game changer. And so we were really fortunate. Like when I started Hope Connects, it actually was with a vision of online counseling being a part of the services that we provided. And back in 2019, online counseling was still a bit of the redheaded stepchild. And online therapists, they swore by it, but I can still remember conversations with other professionals who were convinced that online therapy was not as effective, even though the research did not reflect that. That's not what the research was saying. They were very skeptical of online therapy. And then all of a sudden COVID hit and we didn't have a choice anymore. And so I think we jumped decades ahead in the openness and the working with online therapy. So what I personally have observed, and one of the courses that I actually teach is technology and counseling, because the master's level programs, they it was like they had to catch up. And I think they're still playing catch up with helping the students that are coming out of their programs be prepared, because now we accept online therapy and it's like, oh, okay, but are they actually equipping their students to understand the nuances of online therapy? And that's where I'm seeing a gap, is that students are not being prepared for understanding safety. It looks different when you're doing online therapy. Do you have their physical address? Because if they're in a completely different city and you call 911, Like, you're going to get your local 911, not where that client is. And so one of the things that I've had to make sure and really work with my students to understand that online therapy has got its own nuts and bolts and nuances when we're making sure that we're being safe, ethical clinicians with our clients.
Yeah. Yeah, that's such a good point. And I think that you're you're so right that like because everybody's hand was forced all of a sudden, we were kind of building the plane as we were flying it.
It's
And
a great way of putting that.
I was in higher ed at the time, so I definitely understand the lag there that was happening. And that it's interesting because sometimes the onus is put on the practicum site,
Right.
or internship site to teach students that. But it's difficult if you're not, if they're not getting the educational piece. So filling in that gap is a huge piece of that. I appreciate you pointing that out. What do you
Mhm.
feel like is the biggest difference you notice between having like a student, so like someone that's maybe I think with LPC you guys call it internship, or is that right?
LPCs, we have practicum students when they're in their master's programs and
Okay.
associates. In Texas,
Okay.
it may be different in other areas.
Yeah, I know in social work we call it practicum, so I just don't. I was trying to use the right language. So if like having a
Absolutely.
student versus having an associate, what do you notice is the difference supervision wise in having like people in those different places?
I mean, this one's obvious, but I mean, it truly is the way that experience changes the conversations big
Mm-hmm.
time.
Mm-hmm.
It's in practicum, we're making sure that understanding treatment planning, and we still have those conversations with associates, of course, but understanding again, kind of the basics of a treatment plan. And so the most recent treatment plan that I got from a practicum student was missing the presenting problem. And so I said, well, I can look at this, but I actually don't know where the starting point is. And just helping her to understand conceptually, not just you're just kind of checking these boxes of a treatment plan, but conceptually, what is it doing? What is this for? And by the time they begin to move into their associateship, they've got more of that pre-licensed, they've finished their master's program. For LPCs, they've got at least 100 hours of doing the work. The conversation becomes, how is that objective really hitting that goal? And what other interventions can we grow you with? And so, because the practicum students, they're working on their basic skills. We're working to make sure that they've got a really good foundation underneath their feet to perform some solid therapy. And I see more of a development into the more advanced skills and helping them to understand things from their theoretical orientation, and like, how are they growing and actually doing more of the advanced kinds of things. And so those have been, and again, I think those are probably pretty obvious, but we don't necessarily break it down into seeing how are we adjusting with our students that are in front of us in those spaces.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. And in all of that and what you've experienced, what has been your favorite part of being a supervisor?
Oh man, this is one I could talk about all day. I really enjoy it. I'll be honest, I didn't know if I would. I was so
Mhm.
busy, like running a practice and trying to finish my PhD, that I've had to work on what does it look like to create that space. I've gotten phone calls on Saturday nights from practicum students because of things, and those things that um can be get in the way of your time or whatever. They're just nothing compared to the opportunity to really sit down with the next generation of therapists and helping to cultivate something I'm passionate about, unique or not, individually for myself as a supervisor, is helping them to really understand worldview.
Mhm.
And how does, first, like, what is a worldview? How do you identify a worldview? And start at that starting point of helping them to understand what is their personal worldview. And in that, how do we respect the autonomy and the individuality and the rights of our client to have their own worldview? And what does it look like for us to respect them? And because knowing your worldview and standing and kind of knowing what you believe and simultaneously respecting the rights of others to have their beliefs and that they get to exercise those, and how do you show up in the space of somebody you may not agree with what they're doing,
Yeah.
but we're not looking at a safety issue, we're not looking at these things, we're looking at their right to be different. and protect that right to be different. It's two sides of the same coin when we're talking about worldview. And that's really, I think, a bit of an under-researched area is worldview. And thankfully, I've had the chance to do a little bit of that work with my dissertation, even of like, what does it look like for supervisors to make sure, not just with this clients, but they're also respecting the worldview and the rights of their supervisees. Because I have a worldview as a supervisor that may not align with my supervisee. And what does it look like to make sure that I'm respecting them and their rights in that space too? So I love being able to challenge and just kind of help students grow in that area, but it also keeps me sharp. They ask questions I don't know all the time. Like,
Yeah.
let me back to you on that. And I mean, the moment we think we've arrived as counselors, we're in trouble. And so teachability, it doesn't just have to be a part of what we see in our students. We must remain teachable too. And I think supervision helps to keep us humble, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, as you were talking, I was like, yeah, you're hitting on such a valuable point, which is supervision only makes us better clinicians.
A
Um,
100%.
and, you know, taking when we get in that routine or we get in the like, I think of like, I always use the analogy of like the Oregon Trail. I grew up like
Mhm.
in Kansas City on the Kansas side, and we had to go visit like the wagon rut when
That's
we learned Kansas history.
amazing.
Go visit the wagon rut in like downtown Overland Park of where I forget if it was one of the trails went through there. And so, but it's like that's how you get stuck in this doing the same thing, believing the same thing,
Mhm.
not thinking everybody else should be in that same pathway because you do the same thing over and over again and it digs you deeper and deeper and deeper. And
Right.
I love that that is such a valuable piece of supervision is that we're kind of forced out of that because students and pre-licensed professionals are bringing in different experiences, different worldviews,
Mhm.
different things they're interested in, different types of clients they want to work with that really challenge us to expand on what we know and what we've been learning too.
Absolutely. I could not agree more. 100%.
What do you find is like one of the most challenging pieces of being a supervisor?
Um, I it, hmm, probably those moments when, doing your job just gets in the way of your personal life. Those are kind of the ones that can be challenging, but I don't resent it, if that makes sense. It's
Yeah.
just, it's like you get the phone call at 5 o'clock on a Friday that they have a suicidal client. And I make a point, like I live not even 5 minutes away from my practice. So, I'm able to get to the office at the drop of a hat if I need to, if something happens. And so I've had those phone calls where I'm there, we're working with a suicidal child or we're working with these different things. And those can be tough, but I genuinely just recognize that this is just the part of my job and who and where I am in the practice and what I'm doing. And I weirdly kind of enjoy it because again, you get to be a role model in that space, even of just like being able to show them this is how you handle this. You can stay calm. Like this is how you show up in that space. But it can be difficult. Friday night plans can get derailed a little bit. Maybe working with a student who is maybe a little bit more challenging in their teachability. Sometimes I think kind of using your analogy of the Oregon Trail and kind of getting stuck in that rut, they can be very black and white in what they perceive counseling to be. One of my favorite things that my PhD supervisor said is that, it's the art of therapy. It's an art, it's a dance. And like, how do you move with it? And that fluidity of being able to adjust and knowing the steps. And I think, where older therapists are, we can get a little bit caught in the rut. Sometimes our students get very fixated on this is how therapy is supposed to be. I'm supposed to do it this way.
Yeah.
And they can lose a bit of their flexibility too.
Yeah.
Thankfully, I don't see that as much. I have not personally experienced that as much, but I have seen it in teaching capacities. And
Mhm.
that's challenged me on how I interview students coming in. Who am I working with and what am I scanning for and assessing for before I take somebody on?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think, there's such sometimes a gap between, well, this is what the textbook said versus like, this is what it looks like in real life. And
Uh-huh.
sometimes bridging that gap can be really difficult because I think a lot of us like a formula. I would love a
Uh-huh.
therapeutic intervention that's like, here's 7 steps, it'll go the same way every time and get to 7 and you're good, right? But we all know that
Hmm.
that's not how it actually plays out.
No, but if you find it, please let me know.
Yeah. Yeah, but understandably, that's how students sometimes imagine that therapy will be, right? Like
Hmm.
I learn these steps, um, I implement them, and everything goes as planned. But
Hmm. Right. Absolutely. And I kind of experienced that a little bit myself. Like when I was in my master's program, CBT was a bit of the gold standard, and my program was good about making sure that we were educated on a range of therapeutic approaches. But CBT was really seen as like the thing because there was just so much evidence, there was so much research behind its efficacy. And so, rightly, it had a place in being a strong approach that was taught. And so I was like, I am a CBT therapist. Then I started doing therapy and CBT, and I'm not saying, hopefully, I'm not stepping on any toes of the CBT therapist out there, but I just found there were some clients because CBT is a bit more
yeah,
formulamatic, is that a right word?
yeah,
Than other approaches. And I was like, why is this not working? We are challenging core beliefs, we are challenging thinking patterns, we are thought stopping, we are doing all of these homework assignments. And that's where I realized I need a new tool in my tool belt. And if I had stayed there, I don't that would have been problematic for my clients. So yeah, I can resonate with that even kind of in my earlier days as a therapist.
yeah, yeah. Well, awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time. Where can people find out more about you and your practice and what you have going on?
Sure, yeah. So you can find us at hopeconnectscounseling.com. We are in the more building phases of our social media presence because I have been working on a PhD since I was 12 years old, it seems like at this point. Oh my gosh, I've been in the program for so long. If my degree was a child, it would be like in the sixth or seventh grade at this point. Um, but we do have at Shelley Guess at Shelley Guess on Instagram. It's just my personal one, but I'm in the process of being able to have the bandwidth in the space to start really creating hopefully a presence for us online. But we also do have Hope Connects Consulting, which is a separate LLC, and we are a mental health consulting practice. And so I developed consulting with the heart of really wanting to be able to create these different avenues of making accessibility and information to the community more out there. But I also really wanted the space to help develop my team's careers outside of just counseling. And so they could bring their individual unique expertise to consulting opportunities and speaking and teaching and engaging, because we know burnout is a real thing. And so creating other avenues of professional experience and income. And so I did it both with the eye of taking care of my team, but also recognizing that this is good, hopefully a hub where our community can find a therapist or a mental health professional who has experience in these different areas. And that one is good to come speak to my team. That one is good to come speak to my classroom. So, that's something that we've been really proud to have as an option is being with Hope Connects.
That's really neat. I love that idea. And finding other ways to utilize our skills outside of the therapy room is so valuable. So,
Right. Yeah.
yeah. Well, awesome. Thank you so much for your time. And I hope that you have a good rest of your day.
Thank you. You too. I appreciate it.